Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we bring you the most inspiring stories from history. Stories that touch your heart, open your mind, and help you learn English naturally. Today, I am going to tell you about a man who spent 27 years of his life in a small prison cell. A man who was separated from his family, his friends, and his country. A man who was told he would die forgotten, that his name would be erased, that his cause was lost. But that man did not break. That man held on to hope when hope seemed impossible. And that man walked out of prison and became the president of his nation. His name is Nelson Mandela. How does a person survive nearly 3 decades behind bars and come out with a heart full of forgiveness instead of hatred? How did a boy from a tiny village in South Africa grow up to change the entire world? How did he end one of the most cruel systems of racial oppression in history, not with weapons, but with the power of his spirit? This is a story about injustice, courage, patience, and the incredible strength of the human soul. It is a story that proves that no matter how dark the night, the sun will always rise again. And as always, this story will help you improve your English. Through clear storytelling, meaningful vocabulary, and real-life lessons, you will learn while you listen. Now, let's begin from the very start. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mvizo in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakaniaswa, was a chief and a counselor to the royal family of the Thembu people. His mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was a strong and loving woman who raised Nelson with deep values. He was given the name Ralilala, which in the Xhosa language means pulling the branch of a tree. But in a deeper sense, it means troublemaker. No one could have known then how much trouble this boy would cause, not for evil, but for the sake of justice. When Nelson was only 9 years old, his father died. It was a painful loss, and it changed his life forever. His mother took him to live with the regent of the Thembu people, Chief John Jantaba Dalandibo. There, young Nelson was treated like a son. He lived in a grand house, went to school, and saw how leaders made decisions for the community. He watched the chief listen to every person, no matter how poor or simple, before making a judgment. This planted a seed in Nelson's heart about what true leadership should be. At school, Nelson was given the English name Nelson by his teacher, as was the custom at that time. He was a good student, tall, strong, and always thinking. He loved running and boxing. He went on to study at the University of Fort Hare, one of the few places of higher learning for Black South Africans at that time. But it was there that Nelson first felt the heavy hand of racial injustice. He was sent home from the university for joining a student protest. The authorities did not like young people questioning the rules. Nelson returned to the village, but he was restless. He knew there was a bigger world out there, and a bigger fight waiting for him. To avoid an arranged marriage set up by the chief, Nelson did something bold. He ran away to the city of Johannesburg. He arrived with very little money, no connections, and a burning desire to make something of himself. The big city was a shock. Johannesburg was a place of gold mines, huge buildings, and deep inequality. Black people lived in crowded townships with no electricity or running water. White people lived in comfortable suburbs with gardens and cars. The color of your skin decided where you could live, where you could work, and how you were treated. Nelson found a job as a night watchman at a mine, and later as a law clerk. He studied at night and earned his law degree. He joined a law firm and eventually, with his friend Oliver Tambo, opened the first Black law firm in South Africa. They helped Black people who had been cheated, beaten, and arrested simply because of their race. The work was heartbreaking. Every day, Nelson saw the cruelty of the system called apartheid. Apartheid was the official government policy of racial segregation. It meant that Black people could not vote, could not own land in most areas, had to carry special passes to move around, and were forced to live in separate, inferior places. It was a system designed to make Black people feel like strangers in their own country. The injustice was everywhere. And it was legal. Nelson joined the African National Congress, or ANC, an organization dedicated to fighting for the rights of Black South Africans. At first, the protest was peaceful. Marches, petitions, strikes. Nelson believed in the power of words, reason, and nonviolence. He admired Mahatma Gandhi, who had begun his own journey of peaceful resistance in South Africa many years before. But the government did not listen. The police responded to peaceful protests with bullets. In 1960, in a place called Sharpeville, police opened fire on a crowd of unarmed Black protesters. 69 people were killed. Many of them were shot in the back as they ran. The Sharpeville massacre shocked the world and changed Nelson forever. The government banned the ANC. Peaceful protest had been met with murder. Nelson Mandela made a painful decision. He went underground, leaving his wife and young children behind. He became a ghost, moving from place to place, never sleeping in the same bed twice, always hiding. The newspapers called him the Black Pimpernel. He was the most wanted man in South Africa. During this time, Nelson concluded that nonviolence alone would not end apartheid. He helped form an armed wing of the movement called Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. They planned acts of sabotage against government buildings, bridges, and power stations. They were careful not to hurt any person. Their goal was to damage the system, not to take lives. But the government now labeled Nelson a terrorist. In 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested. He had been betrayed, his hiding place revealed. He was put on trial and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But the worst was yet to come. The next year, the police raided a farm where ANC leaders had been meeting. They found documents and plans. Nelson, already in prison, was now charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. This trial became known as the Rivonia trial, and it could have easily ended with the death penalty. In April 1964, Nelson Mandela stood in the courtroom. He knew he might be sentenced to death. But he did not plead for mercy. Instead, he gave a speech that would echo through history. He spoke about the dream of a free and equal society. He said it was an ideal for which he was prepared to die. His final words in that courtroom were, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against Black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The court was silent. The world listened. Instead of the death penalty, Nelson Mandela and his comrades were sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to Robben Island, a cold, windy prison in the middle of the ocean. The journey there was on a small, shaking boat. When they arrived, the guards shouted, stripped them, and threw them into small cells. Nelson's cell was just 2 meters by 2.5 meters. One small window. A thin mat on the stone floor. A bucket for a toilet. This tiny cell would be his home for the next 18 years. The daily life on Robben Island was designed to break the spirit. Prisoners were forced to work in a limestone quarry, breaking rocks under the hot sun. The light from the white rock burned their eyes. They were barely fed. They were allowed only one letter and one visit every 6 months. The guards were cruel. They insulted, beat, and punished the prisoners for the smallest things. But inside that stone prison, Nelson Mandela remained unbroken. He found ways to fight. He became a leader inside the prison walls. He demanded better conditions. He organized hunger strikes. He taught the younger prisoners history, politics, and law. The prison was supposed to silence them, but Nelson turned it into a school. They called Robben Island the university. Even in chains, he continued to learn. He studied for a law degree through correspondence. He read books and newspapers whenever he could. He learned Afrikaans, the language of the white oppressors, because he knew that to negotiate, he must understand the other side. He told his fellow prisoners, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Over time, the guards began to respect him. Even some of the hardest men, raised to hate him, could not deny the quiet power of this man. He was polite, firm, and never broken. But the pain of imprisonment was deep. His mother died while he was in prison. He was not allowed to attend her funeral. His eldest son died in a car accident. Again, he was denied the chance to say goodbye. He suffered these losses behind bars alone, with only the cold sea wind for company. His heart was shattered, but his will remained solid. Back in the outside world, the name Nelson Mandela was growing louder. The anti-apartheid movement spread across the globe. People in London, New York, Berlin, and Lagos marched and demanded his freedom. Songs were sung. Posters were hung. Free Nelson Mandela became an international cry. Years passed. The apartheid government began to feel the pressure. Economic sanctions were hurting the country. The internal resistance was growing. By the 1980s, secret meetings began to happen. Government officials visited Nelson in prison. They wanted to see if there was a way out. Nelson was patient. He listened. He did not demand revenge. He demanded peace and equal rights. After 18 years on Robben Island, he was moved to Pollsmoor Prison, then to Victor Verster Prison, where conditions were slightly better. The talks with the government continued. Nelson Mandela was negotiating the future of his country from inside a prison cell. And then, finally, on February 11th, 1990, the world watched as a tall, thin, gray-haired man walked out of the prison gates. Nelson Mandela was free. He was 71 years old. He had spent 27 years in prison. His wife Winnie was at his side. His hand was raised in a fist of victory. The crowd roared with joy. The world wept. It was one of the most powerful moments in modern history. But his release was not the end of the struggle. It was the beginning of the most delicate part. He had to negotiate with the very government that had imprisoned him. He had to convince them to give up their power peacefully. And he had to convince his own angry, suffering people to choose forgiveness over revenge. The country was on the edge of a bloody civil war. Violence was exploding in the townships. Extremist groups on both sides wanted to burn everything down. Nelson Mandela stood in the middle and said, "Let there be peace." He met with the white president, F.W. de Klerk. They argued fiercely, but they worked together. They planned a new South Africa where all races could vote. In 1993, both men received the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts. And in 1994, the miracle happened. South Africa held its first free elections in which people of all races could vote. Black South Africans, who had been treated as nobodies in their own land, stood in long lines, some waiting for hours, just to put a piece of paper in a box. It was the first vote of their lives. Old men and women wept. They had waited their whole lives for this moment. The result was clear. Nelson Mandela became the first Black president of South Africa. His inauguration was a symbol of hope. People around the world watched. And in a move of pure genius and forgiveness, he invited the prison guards from Robben Island to attend as honored guests. As president, Nelson Mandela did not seek revenge. He did not punish the white minority. Instead, he promoted something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. People who had committed terrible acts during apartheid could confess their crimes. If they told the truth honestly, they could be forgiven. It was not about punishment. It was about healing. He created a new constitution, built houses, brought clean water to millions, and worked to unite a broken land. He was not perfect. No leader is. But he was exactly what South Africa needed at that time. He stepped down after one term, unlike many African leaders who held power for decades. He showed the world that true leadership is not about clinging to power, but about knowing when to leave. After his presidency, he continued to work for peace, education, and the fight against HIV/AIDS, which had deeply affected South Africa. He became a global symbol of dignity and hope. He spent time with children because he knew they were the future. Nelson Mandela lived to see his dream partially realized. His long walk was not finished, but the path had been cleared for millions to follow. On December 5, 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Mandela passed away at his home in Johannesburg. The world mourned. Flags flew at half-mast. Leaders from every corner of the globe gathered to honor him. The boy from Mizo had become a giant. Now, what can we learn from the life of Nelson Mandela? First, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Nelson Mandela was afraid many times. In prison, in hiding, in the courtroom facing death. But he did not let fear control his actions. He acted in spite of his fear. True courage means doing the right thing even when you are terrified. Second, patience and persistence are powerful weapons. 27 years in prison. That is a very long time. Many would have given up hope. But Nelson believed that the arc of history is long, and it bends toward justice. He held on. He kept believing. Great change rarely happens overnight. You must keep going, even when the progress is invisible. Third, education changes the world. Nelson Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." He learned in prison. He taught in prison. He believed that an educated mind can never be truly enslaved. Every word of English you learn, every book you read, every lesson you complete, you are unlocking more power within yourself. Fourth, forgiveness is strength, not weakness. The easy thing would have been to seek revenge. The strong thing was to forgive. Nelson Mandela knew that hatred would only keep his nation in chains. He chose to build bridges, not walls. In your own life, holding on to anger only hurts you. Letting go and moving forward is the path to freedom. Finally, one person truly can make a difference. A boy from a tiny village with no running water, no power, no privilege, became one of the most respected figures in human history. You do not need to be born into greatness. You can rise to it through your choices, your character, and your commitment to a cause bigger than yourself. Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." You, right now, are learning a new language. It might feel impossible. The words might feel strange. The path might feel long. But remember the man in the tiny cell on a cold island. He faced the impossible every single day for 27 years. And he did not give up. And in the end, he walked out into the sun free. Your freedom, your success, your dream is waiting for you. It always seems impossible until you do it. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or inspired you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with a friend who needs hope today. And let me know in the comments, what part of Nelson Mandela's life meant the most to you? I read every comment. Until next time, keep walking your long road, keep dreaming of a better future, and never, ever give up. Bye for now.